All right. So today is April 3rd, 2019. This is the Kubernetes SIG cloud provider biweekly meeting. I'm going to put a link to the agenda in the chat in case anyone needs it. I did change the permissions for the agenda, so you have to be in the Kubernetes dev mailing list to actually edit it going forward. Just an FYI. And actually, I'm going to start by sharing my screen because I want to do a run through of our backlog in a bit. Great. Can folks see my screen? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
All right. Great. Thank you. All right. So before going through our agenda, I wanted to run through two announcements. The first one is that we are escalating our SIG folding proposal to the steering committee on April 10th. So on the April 10th steering committee meeting, Tim St. Clair will kind of be our point of contact to walk through the proposal. So Nishi and I will be there for sure. If anyone else in the SIG wants to be involved in this discussion and wants to have a say, yeah, please join the April 10th steering committee meeting, which is the same time as right now, but just next week. So related to that, there is some discussions going on around user group governance, which is led by Philip Whitrock. So he's kind of pinging some SIGs right now, trying to figure out what user groups should look like, and trying to figure out the governance model around them. And so I know we've had many discussions around what we want user groups to look like. And so if you have opinions on this and you want to have a say in this, then please reach out to Philip and make sure you're involved in those discussions. And the last one is in 1.15, we are removing some of the class-specific bootstrap RBAC rules. And so if you are running on a cloud provider that depends on these RBAC rules, just be warned that they will be removed in 1.15. And they have been deprecated since 1.13. I think it's just the AWS provider, as far as I can tell, but this is just a heads up. Was someone talking? All right, I'm gonna keep going. I think it was just some feedback. All right, cool. So I wanted to run through our P0 and P1 backlog issues for 1.15. So what I wanted to do was run through our P0s and P1s, and then see if we want any of the P2s and P3s added or bumped in priority into P0 and P1 for 1.15. So I'm hoping this only takes about like 10 to 15 minutes, but I wanted to walk through each issue and make sure that everyone has a say in what we're going to be working on for the upcoming release. Sound good? All right, cool. So you should be able to see my screen I'm on the issue board right now. So we'll just kind of go down the list. So first thing is API server network proxy. So this is the KEP plus implementation that Walter is going to be working on. So this is P0 for 1.15. Sound good, Walter?
Sounds good. If everyone can make sure they take a quick look at the KEP, I'm actually trying to get it merged right now, and it would be helpful if each cloud provider could just sort of chime in that either they're okay or if they had any problems with the KEP.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, please take a look at this.
Yeah, especially like Mike, Andrew, if you guys could take a look, I would love to get, I think I've got an Azure sign off at this point, Google sign off, but I'd love to get, VMware, Amazon et al.
Yeah, I'll make sure we take a look at it here.
Thank you.
Right, and so the implication there is none of the providers, so only Google is using it, but there's a pretty good chance that other providers may want to extend whatever is happening, whatever's proposed here for their own API server proxy in the future. right?
Yeah, I mean, there, and in fact, take a look at, in the CAP, there's a related CVE. So this discusses how you can use this new feature to solve that particular CVE. And there are it's an point of extensibility on API machinery, which can be useful for tunneling traffic between a master that's remote to the cluster. So there's some interesting things you can do with it there.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next issue is extracting/migrating the credential provider. So this is KEP plus alpha implementation as well, and Mike Crude is taking the lead on this one. Are we okay with this being P0 for 115? Thumbs up. All right, sweet. All right, keep controller manager to cloud controller manager migration. So this is defining in a KEP what the migration mechanism is going to look like and providing an alpha implementation for early testers to use. So Mike and I are going to take this one. I think it belongs in P0 for 115. Anyone disagree? All right. All the docs, vSphere, OpenStack, GC, Azure, AWS, those are all P0. If anyone objects, now's the time to speak up, but I think, improving docs is pretty overdue for a lot of the providers. I will personally be working on the vSphere docs this release cycle.
Yeah, so, and I'll take the OpenStack integration doc for this.
Yeah, I was going to say, my only objection is having something that's P0 and help wanted. I agree they should be P0, but I think we need to get representatives from the appropriate cloud providers signed up for each of these.
Yeah, that's a good point. I may remove all the help wanted labels. It seems like for the most part, we have people assigned. I think it's just the AWS and Azure one that doesn't have like a point of contact yet. Mike, do you want to, can I assign you to this?
Yeah, I can act as the point of contact on that. I've got to do some cat herding.
This is very, hopefully I will get a bit more bandwidth after this week to work on what I was working with was the reorganization of the landing page of the docs, and then the half-done attempt to reorganize the sections on the cloud provider section. So I will be hopefully helping to pin people from different providers also to help classify their own offers and all of that, what we were doing like 1 month ago or more.
Andrew,
yeah, awesome.
Is there a parent issue for this? Since all of these are essentially the same issue, is there a parent issue so that we can make sure we're collaborating in a way that is consistent?
So there is the KEP, and there are multiple issues kind of scattered across. Right. But yeah, I mean, the KEP is kind of a guideline for what the bare minimum for the docs are. I don't expect it to be followed word for word. So yeah, like for me, separate issues make sense, just to help prioritize.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
All right, cool. Is there any Azure folks on the call that we can assign the Azure docs to? I kind of just assigned all the chairs, but I feel like that's not the most effective way.
Yeah, I'll take it.
All right, sweet. All right, next issue is stage all the in-tree cloud providers. I'm realizing this is a bit more work with the Go modules changes happening and all that, but I still think this is kind of P0 worthy for 115. Sound good? All right. And yeah, this is almost done. This is removing all the internal dependencies. That is going to be needed for staging, so that also must be P0 for 115.
While you're looking at that, you may as well mark off cloud or credential provider.
Yes, good point.
I hate to point this out, but we also need someone to, presumably some group of the in-tree providers, to go and recheck their cloud providers, because these things always seem to, this list always seems to grow a little bit with each release.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we do have an import restrictions check in the provider's directory, I think. So that should stop people, but yeah, that's a good point. We should follow up and make sure we haven't accidentally added more. Okay, I can follow up.
Yeah, as a note for that, can we break the checklist into different phases? Like as we're adding things, just separate it.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, we're almost, it's kind of late for that because we're almost done, but yeah.
So one thing to call out on this list too is package util mount has been kind of in progress since 1.13 and hasn't got a ton of traction. Do we need to spend some more time there?
So Travis is Travis from VMware. I don't know if he's on the call, but he has been. Go for it, Travis.
Oh, so yeah, it hasn't got a lot of traction on that particular PR. So the approach that's currently in place, I've gotten 4 smaller PRs merged. So I'm kind of chunking it off into smaller pieces. So it has my full attention, and it is going to happen for 1.15.
Okay,
but,
awesome.
I've got I would say 1 merge this morning. I've got 2 others. I keep linking them in. I've got 2 others that are open and passing tests right now, but it's a big task, and they keep changing the way they want it to look, which is totally fine. It always makes sense, but I apologize that it's taken so long.
Yeah, it's one of the hard dependencies to remove. But yeah, if you go to the PR, there has been a bunch of activity in the past few months, breaking it out into smaller PRs, as Travis mentioned.
Okay, cool. And my intention wasn't to call you out, Travis. It was just more to kind of raise the issue that it's kind of been one of our long running ones.
All right. Okay, P0, P1s. Okay, I think, let me put the milestone on here. Okay, so we have 3 P1s for removing the Photon, Cloud Stack, and Overt Cloud Provider. I know DIMS has a PR open for this that should merge soon. So just throwing this in the P1 for 1.15. Finalize protection for service load balancer. This is sort of like a cross SIG network cloud provider issue. I get quite a few people pinging me on Slack about the fact that they have like load balancers, cloud load balancers kind of being dangled because the API server, or not the API server, the controller manager exited or errored out in the middle of a delete operation against an LB. And so this seems pretty high priority. We have two PRs open already, but we need to kind of finalize this a bit more, maybe write a CAP for this. Jiatang from my team at VMware is already assigned to this issue. So I'm considering this P1 for 1.15.
We could fix that without a finalizer, right? We could just like make the controller reconcile.
The problem is that if you delete the service already, you can't reconcile the LB because I don't know, like
the ID. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of tricky because we have to do this over multiple releases. Like in one release, we have to support handling the finalizer and not actually adding the finalizer, so that in a future release, when a user rolls back, we don't have services stuck with finalizers without the controllers handling it. Yeah, it's a hard problem, but I think we can at least get that first part done in 1.15. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, cool. Investigate alternatives for out-of-tree PV labeling. We essentially deleted the out-of-tree PV labeler in 1.14 because we found out that it was really buggy and wasn't really doing what we expected. So we deleted it, backported Cinder and vCR support in the in-tree admission controller. And now we need to figure out whether we want a mutating webhook for this or some sort of out-of-tree solution. I'm throwing this in P1, even if it means that we're just saying like we don't want to support this functionality at all. I think we should at least come to a consensus on that by the end of the release. Good? All right. Next one is GA Cloud Provider Node Labels KEP. So this is the KEP just saying to promote all the beta.kubernetes labels for the node instance type and the node zone and region. So this is mostly just cleanup work. I don't think it's that high priority in terms of users demanding that the label should be updated, but this is more of some like really outdated cleanup work that we should be doing because those labels have been marked beta since like 1.2 or long time ago. So I personally would like to see this get done because we're going to have to, like, renaming the labels is going to take multiple releases because we can't break compatibility. So I want to get this started sooner rather than later. All right, silence is acceptance. Okay, P2 issues. These are the only two P2 issues. Are we happy with these two being in P2? Or do we feel like we need to bump any of these into P1?
I'm just sort of curious, what do we mean by nodes are being registered multiple times in the CCM?
Yeah, so essentially what's happening here is if you get a second update event on a node that is currently being registered, then essentially you add it into the initialized process loop again. And so this is typically okay because in the end, everything reconciles to the same state, but then you end up doing multiple calls to the cloud provider, which can be undesirable. So this is why it's P2, because in the worst case scenario, you slow down node registration and you're doing excessive calls to the API, but there's no bugs involved or anything.
Okay, that sounds right then.
Okay. And P3s, these are our P3s. Anyone think we need to bump these into P2 or P1?
You want to make that up? You want to do that?
All right. Okay, I'll take that as a no. But if anyone does have opinions on these, let me know and we can bump them up for 115. All right, cool. So I think our backlog is in pretty good shape for execution in 115. So P0s and P1s should ideally be done a few weeks before 115 is cut, and then anything that's P2 or P3 is nice to have, but we don't really need to get to them.
For any major features, isn't there an earlier deadline to let SIG release know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how many weeks before. Stephen, would you happen to know? When's the enhancement freeze?
Enhancement freeze is usually 3 weeks to a month out from the release start date. Claire is on vacation right now, but she needs to set the schedule for the next release.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if you're working on a feature for 115, have the enhancement issue up and ready, 3 to 4 weeks before the cut. All right, cool.
Do we know what we plan on having as, do we have things tagged for like GA, beta, etc.? So and as an example, the first one, which was mine, the network proxy, that's going to be alpha in 115. Does it even sense? Thank you. Drew.
But yeah, in the enhancement issue, there's an alpha label you can use. There should be an enhancement issue for every enhancement that you're adding to Kubernetes anyways. And then we can always update the description of the backlog issue as we progress it from alpha to beta and GA. Okay. So there was one backlog item that I skipped, which is defining the requirements for cloud config. So this came up last week in one of the PR reviews, and Clayton Coleman noticed that there is no API guarantees or compatibility guarantees with cloud config. And so cloud config is one of those things where it kind of grew organically and we never really documented or defined what we expect out of cloud config. And so every provider has kind of been using it in a different way. So I guess what we need to decide for 115 is, do we want to, we need to have a discussion about this. Like, do we want to keep cloud config the way it is? Do we want to document backwards compatibility guarantees, rules around how to update, add new fields to it? and whatnot. Do any folks have opinions on this?
I would be very much in favor of formalizing the idea that we don't break it just for fun, but I think it's a lot of work. It's sort of the back door where we stuff a lot of functionality, at least on AWS, that is not really stuff that we want to support everywhere, but is important to certain sort of subgroups or like smaller groups of people. So I would be wary of trying to like make that process very heavy. And like formalizing as an API would be heavy in my book.
I was thinking if we wanted to adopt the API guarantee that Kubernetes has in general and apply that to the configuration of cloud providers.
I think that because we're a Kubernetes project, we should be doing that.
Doesn't seem to be like too much. Not too much, but more like not on the heavy side of supporting. It's basically just a guarantee that we're not going to break backward compatibility up to a certain reasonable degree, which, if I understand correctly, is like a year or something.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can inherit from the thinking that went into the component config that would apply here?
Any SIG cluster lifecycle folks on the call?
I mean, I think that would be that. There are certainly a group doing that, and we could look into what they're doing. My interpretation is that they are effectively formalizing it as an API. I think we can. I think there's a clear use case for doing that for other pieces. I don't know that these are widely used options that have the same use case. In this case, cloud config.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess generally the trend that I see is there's another proposal recently by Han about metrics as essentially as part of the API, and really it's an implicit API surface, and it seems similar in some ways to this situation, where there's behavior of the system and clients of the system are expecting it to behave a certain way, and what are the guarantees of that?
So can I step back and ask a silly question? Well, obviously, I can't.
I think I know what you're thinking. Go on.
That was one. What's the next one?
In our final state, where every cloud provider is doing all the cloud provider work in their own repo, each cloud config then ends up living in that repo, correct?
Yes, and today it lives in the cloud provider.
Well, yeah, and today it lives in Kate's because it's, right?
But it's per, the definition of the cloud config is per cloud provider.
Right. But this is why I'm moving us down the road to the point where we've accomplished breaking that out. And so at that point, I think it's worth looking at it today versus our destination, because in our destination, no one cares but that cloud provider, correct?
That's also the case.
Well, I think it's a guarantee that an implicit guarantee that you give to whoever consumes anything that is officially blessed as a Kubernetes part of the Kubernetes project.
Yeah, that's my point. I mean, today it's officially part of the Kubernetes project. In a year from now, if all goes well, Google Cloud Config lives in cloud provider GCP and is incapable of infecting anyone who is not building cloud provider GCP. Whereas today, I change the Google Cloud Config, and you may not be consuming it, but it is still part of your source code if you're Amazon or Azure or VMware, right?
No, I get what you're saying. I think I'm more concerned of the supportability statement, or the implicit contract that you have with whoever is using it, not necessarily whoever is building it.
Yeah, I agree with Fabio. It's about changing the behavior of the system for automation that's calling and creating clusters, for example.
Yeah.
And it's not about us breaking each other or It's about us breaking our customers, and if there's value in being consistent across the way we do this, so that if, I don't know, someone working on the Amazon side finds a better pattern for interacting with those resources, that we all kind of have the same consistent behavior. And especially customers who are moving, who have multi-cloud deployments, like that's where it gets really annoying if it's drastically different.
Yeah, there's another angle to it, which is there's a lot of arbitrary definition of beta and alpha and experimental features in cloud providers. So, you might have a service that comes out today and it's marked as beta, and you don't want to make that, implicit assumption that that API is going to be around for a year. So you want to mark that as beta, so you don't provide support for it in, support for it in the same way that Kubernetes defines support for an API. So it should be left to the cloud provider to define what is considered beta, what is considered alpha, what is considered GA stable, and then apply the same rules for supportability for those APIs, for that cloud config API.
Maybe this is where we can adopt Jago's, I guess, meta suggestion, which is there is the component working group that is going to define how components should move their configuration to a component config approach. As Walter points out, all our cloud providers will be external components. So we can say when you break them out, start moving or copying, like the ability to set those options that we're currently setting in cloud config into component config, and work towards deprecating cloud config. Because there's they are config. There's no reason to have a separate file other than backwards compatibility.
I like that idea. It's probably more of a long-term strategy, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, this is what. Yeah, thank you for putting it better. I mean, this is what I'm trying to say, in that I think there is the short term and the long term for this.
Do we have to do anything short term other than just saying we won't break things?
I think we may actually need to be more involved in the short term. We, the SIG, saying, look, we need to be stable. We need to be ... At some point, I think we should be giving guidance, but once it is Google's config in cloud provider GCP, I think it becomes less a SIG cloud provider issue and more of a, Google problem. I mean, Google and Google customers problem. Or if it's cloud provider AWS, it is Amazon and Amazon customers problem.
Yeah, and looking at this, I definitely agree with the idea that we should have some stability guarantees, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of meaningful overlap between the cloud configs, so I'd worry a little bit about like SIG cloud provider trying to standardize that. But I definitely agree on the stability guarantees.
I'm definitely against standardizing anything at that level. I'm okay with having a shared supportability statement, which could be using the same Kubernetes has, and maybe I'm in favor in general of having the same place to store the configuration, which could be a component config, but not as standardizing the actual API or the config parameters or anything like that. That should be just left up to the cloud providers.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there. Anyone want to take the action item on this to document somewhere that we shouldn't break the cloud config compatibility without significant warning and yada yada yada. Same thing with our APIs, and then maybe also document longer term kind of offloading that ownership, like offloading the compatibility guarantees to each provider when we externalize them all.
I can do it, but where do we want to put it?
Yeah, that was my question too. Cap?
Yeah, I think a cap would be good.
And if I don't merge the KEP, we're allowed to break the cloud config as much as we want.
I can go take a look, but I thought we actually had a Kubernetes backward compatibilities guarantee page. So I think irrespective of where else it goes, we should be adding something there.
Okay. Is that clear what the next steps are then? So look at the backwards compatibility doc page we have, see if it's there, and if not, maybe propose KEP.
And I'm happy to help if there's a need to, write a KEP.
Thanks, Gabriel.
All right. All right, next item is rebase core container images to distro lists.
Yes.
Yuan? Yeah.
Can you come closer?
Can everyone hear you, Ann?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so right now we are working on an effort to rebasing Kubernetes images from Alpine, Debian, or from scratch to distro lists. And this may affect every cloud providers to some degree, depends on which containers you use. So to give a brief background knowledge, so distroless is much smaller in size and is more secure. So we want to use the distroless, but also distroless doesn't have certain packages or dependencies like Debian. For example, it doesn't have shell. So I look at that there are some containers like Kube API server, which use shell to upstart that container. I think that's for the log redirection. Basically, it pipe the log to a path. And this is just one example, but that example, for such kind of shell use case, we can remove that because right now we already migrate glog to klog, and we can provide a flag to direct the log. For me, I have two questions now. One question is, before I rebase the images to distroless, we need each cloud provider to update their manifest to remove the shell. Those manifests include the Kube API server, Kube controller manager, and the Kube scheduler. So basically all those cloud configs we talked about. And the second question I have is, for those containers that's not under KK, what's the good approach to contact with each cloud provider so as they can be aware of the image change? Because I think each cloud provider, we manage our own way to bring up a container. And some containers is bring up with a shell, with some bash scripts, some may not. Yeah, so this is my question. I raise it up because I want to hear some feedbacks, or also I want to know what's the point of contact from each org.
So if I'm understanding correctly, there's two problems here. There's the manifest files that live inside Kubernetes/Kubernetes that specify a bunch of manifest add-ons that are using the shell redirects and whatnot. So
yes.
Those need to be updated first, right?
Yes.
And
I think we can.
Kubernetes.
You cut out there, Andrew.
Oh, sorry. And then the second one is like everything outside of Kubernetes/Kubernetes that needs to be updated. Like how do we warn the right providers and users?
So for the first question, actually, I already provided some examples. I updated the GCP manifest. That can be used as a good example. I can send out the emails to each cloud provider point of contact, but I don't know whom to send the email to. I'm going to rebase the images at the end of April. So there's a kind of softer deadline. So I want to have a better coordination with those people. For the second question, I think I am going to make the changes to the non-Kubernetes containers, but I want to notify each cloud provider if they use that container. because depends on the way how they use it. Their container may be broken after my change.
Yeah, so just a little more background and context. Thank you, UN, for joining today. UN was asking where's the place to go and talk to all the people this might affect. It's a pretty broad and sweeping change, and careful people will do the right things to try not to have undesired impact. But as you all know, our test suites are not comprehensive to the point where we will have ultimate certainty that nothing has broken. And so the first goal here is just awareness that this is going on. And if something seems off or strange, just to know that this change has taken place. And the other is to establish the lines of communication so that if UN needs extra sets of eyes from other places, she's trying to take on that work and chop the wood and carry the water so that we don't just ask everyone to do it and no one quite gets around to it. But the overall goal is security-based and size. And so this is an important effort, but it's also super broad reaching and has the potential to cause some very confusing changes in behavior. Is that helpful, UN? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And so this is also like tooling, like, I mean, from my point of view, tooling like COPS, for example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know COPS has a more obnoxious shell usage than others because we try to pipe both to, for example, varlog kube API server and the standard out, and preserve signals. So yeah, if we could just have klog do that, that would be great. But we have to double pipe or like pipe to both places. Send it to both places. We don't really care how it gets there, but it would be a great simplification. But in terms of like the COPS perspective, I would expect you would just break things and then we would have to fix it. Like, I see. Giving us a heads up is very nice and appreciated, but that's what the tools have to deal with.
I think actually we already have some ongoing discussions about how we can make the debugging easier without the shell. And there's some tools under development. It's not in a good shape right now.
Is that debug containers?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to ask about is like, is that coming? Because that's going to be a big.
Yeah, I think Team Austere is looking at it, but yeah, potentially is not well shaped yet.
It's going to be a tough thing to remove the shell and not have debug containers, right?
Yeah.
So we're planning a debugging training where we let people experiment with how they start solving known problems in this new environment.
I just had another brains. We also want tar in there so that kubectl CP works. Or I don't know how. Yes, let's do that and see what. I suspect this will go very badly. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, and just for more understanding, it's not just Kubernetes itself that's sometimes based on Alpine. Alpine is fairly ubiquitous in open source projects. So have we made any decisions about how many layers of the onion we're going to peel back? Like there's, I don't know, FluentD or Core DNS. Like I don't know what else is based on Alpine. Have you done that research?
In current stage, we have an exception list. We are going to update those container images, but there's some exceptions, and we will keep that those containers in the exception list. Like an IP table can, images that require IP table can be one use case. Images that have a very strong dependencies on shell scripts, for example, XCD server, that can be one example to the exception list. So it's like we still have a plan B. Did that answer your question?
Not really, but the answer did give me some sense of how deep the rabbit hole goes and how far down it seems like you are. Maybe is the best way to. I expect this will be a long and winding path, as Justin points out, we'll just break some things and see what happens. So I'm all for it. Sounds great. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, I also like the fact I'm hearing we're going to break a limited set of things, and once those are working, we'll break the next limited set of things.
Yeah. So it should be fun. Thank you very much, Yuan, for joining and giving that. And folks, please do take a look at that KEP.
And by the way, it's merged at this point, Yuan. Sorry for taking so long to review that. Yeah, so in terms of like messaging wide, like the places that come to mind are SIG architecture, KDev itself, this meeting, the cloud provider chairs, and possibly cluster lifecycle, SIG release, SIG testing.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's really the entire community.
And UN did send at least one email to KDev that I saw, so it started broad and making a round to a few of more of those SIG meetings would be super helpful.
Okay.
You may want to check with one of the SIG Arch chairs before you go there. I think they're trying to cut down on the number of KEPs they look at, but this may be worth them looking. I just checked with one of the Arch chairs.
Yeah, so it was merged in as a SIG release KEP. I'm thinking now that it's more closer to a Kubernetes wide KEP. So they prefer, ideally you shoot a note to the mailing list before coming to the meeting, at least to like allow them to set the scope and know what they need to talk about. So I would do that as well. Like just add them to the last message you sent.
Okay.
Yeah, and so for action items on in this SIG, if you send a message to the mailing list, I will do my best to poke all the TLs and the individual providers and let them know.
So TL, how can I find out the TL list? I know I can find the owner from the owner list in each repo, but for the TL, how I can find
Yeah, so in Kubernetes community, there is an owner's alias, right, that will list the chairs and technical leads, and then in each of the SIG specific directories, it'll list the chairs versus the technical leads. But honestly, like either one that you reach out to should be able to carry the ball forward for you.
I see. Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Right. Next item is by Travis, discuss KEP guidance on CSI plugin implementation locations.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I wanted to bring this topic up as there is a provisional KEP for the Cloud Controller Manager that talks about repository requirements in here. And as part of that, it lists having separate folders for additional features. And one of them listed is CSI. And as a CSI plugin developer, I've kind of run into a little bit of pain with this because a CSI plugin is kind of a separate binary, a separate entity that is shipped and matured and versioned and gains its own features potentially at a different rate than the Cloud Controller Manager itself. A quick GitHub survey of the community, when I look around, not many people are actually following this. When I look at the cloud provider repos that are out there, the only implementations that have CSI plugins in the same place as the cloud provider that I could find are vSphere and OpenStack. All of the other CSI plugins that are under a Kubernetes org are under Kubernetes SIGs. There's a couple out there that are not inside of a Kubernetes org anywhere. The main one I saw for that is Ceph. But I just kind of wanted to bring this topic up and see whether or not this KEP should be amended in some way, if that's a thing, or what the general thought around that is. And another good prompting issue for that topic is like AWS announced 2 new CSI plugins today, and I saw some press around that. They're both in Kubernetes SIGs. So wanted to know if this was really something that was desired by the community to see that, because I definitely see it as a separate plugin, a separate binary that needs to be managed separately from the CCM.
I know that on the OpenStack provider, we like to keep the code together just because our provider depends on the CSI driver. That doesn't mean we can't do it elsewhere. It's just nice for us to have all of our work in one place, but it may not be the best idea.
And speaking for vSphere, it's actually the same. I mean, if you're going to move to an out-of-tree cloud provider for vSphere, you have to use a CSI plugin. They go hand in hand. But when it comes to like release engineering for the CSI plugin, you run into oddities like, hey, if I want to tag a version and do a release, well, I can't tag a CSI plugin on like the Git repository separately from the CCM. And so the versions are always locked, which is a little weird. So I kind of want to see if like in this KEP, if it's considered a mandate or if I just kind of read it that way, and if we should do any clarifying language to say, hey, you can do this if you want, but it's not required.
I mean, this KEP is, I think it's coming up on 1.5 years or 2 years old now. And I think that the original intention of it was to have it be a work in progress and we could adjust it if it wasn't working the way we wanted. Yeah, because I know that, like we have an in-tree volume provider and we've been working to make that interface to the external volume provider, but we still have to keep the API around. So I can see where the versioning issues are real. So, I would view it as more as a suggestion, since it's pretty much a suggestion anyway at this point. But I think that others may have strong views on this, and I'm open to change.
Walter, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just going to make an even stronger statement than Chris did. I think we need to get to a world where we have multiple repos and I think at some point, whether it's this or like, I'm going to use Google as an example, please excuse me, but there needs to be a top level GCP repo that assembles a deployable out of Kate's, CCM, and whatever else, and where we can separately version each of these binaries and make something deployable from that. And to my mind, I guess I'm just going to strengthen it. It seems perfectly reasonable to me that the CSI is its own binary, and that we, the owners of the Google CSI driver go in when they're ready and say, hey, I've got a new, ready for a prime time version. They update a dependency in the top level repo to pull in the newest version.
So this sounds like it could.
Justin is giving me looks.
What?
I think it sounds great.
Justin's giving me looks. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that this sounds like part of the goal for the like the hack scripts that exist, right? To like the cluster up scripts and stuff like that, or to move those out and turn those into conformance profiles, right? So it sounds like this is not quite like Kubernetes conformance itself, but it's cloud provider conformance. So maybe we can co-opt some of the ideas that they're having over there and develop something similar. Crickets.
I just want to make a comment on the repo situation. So right now we know that SIG cloud provider oversees everything that has to do with cloud providers, but so SIG storage, as far as I understand, does not want to have the same overseeing responsibility over the CSI plugins. So there's the CSI plugins don't have a home, so to speak. So they don't have like a pre-assigned SIG to live under. So it's kind of like a gray,
I mean, what I've seen so far. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just about to say that. Yeah, that is a point, because a lot of the cloud providers do provide their, like we provide our own CSI plugin, but I can see that you may have a plugin, but not a associated cloud provider.
Yeah, what I've seen so far to date has been pretty consistent. There's really just, there's kind of three categories. One being not under any Kubernetes org, and I think that's separate. But it's either, the CSI plugin lives with the CCM, which there's only 2 examples of today that I could find, and every other one is under the Kubernetes SIGs organization. And then that means that in order to get that repo, you got to have your sponsoring SIG, and your CSI plugin is a defined subproject of that SIG. So when I look at AWS's or Google's, like all of that's in place for all of them, where, you know, SIG AWS has each one of the CSI plugins as a subproject, and then created that Kubernetes SIGs repo. And so that's kind of, it seems like the de facto standard right now, but I wasn't sure, which I think is kind of what Fabio is getting at, like if that should be codified somehow. And yeah, the feedback.
Well, I mean, would it make sense to expand the scope of the SIG to encompass more than clouds, but providers in general? Because it seems like we're putting machinery in place, and we're going in front of the steering committee to handle a lot of this machinery. And if we want, you know, if there needs to be a place where people can do this work, instead of placing, you know, having to find SIGs, instead finding working groups underneath, you know, SIG cloud provider, may be a solution that addresses this, where you have lighter weight organizations that are able to own that code under a parent SIG.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out is that it's not clear to me that all or even most CSIs are cloud provider specific, unless the persistence team has changed the original proposal. You know, all file system drivers were going to become CSI across the board, even if they were not cloud provider specific. And in fact, I believe the majority of them are not cloud provider specific. So we have an NFS CSI driver, and it would be interesting to see where we would put that.
That already exists, and it's under the Kubernetes-CSI org. And in discussions with SIG storage, they were making kind of a clear line in the sand about, okay, if it's something that is core, like a core file system thing, and we develop it, it can go in Kubernetes-CSI, but no vendors could. So that's why AWS or VMware or something can't get a repo there.
Oh, no, and that seems appropriate. I just want to make sure that when we start working out how to divide things, that we have a rational plan for where everything gets a home.
Yeah, so I think that the document you have open now has two sections, that the repository should have the following subdirectories, and the repository may have the additional directories. Answering this specific question may be as easy as moving the CSI from the should to the may. But I think the bigger question is about consistency of structure and organization of how to assemble the bits you want into a workable installation of Kubernetes. And that ends up being a much more challenging question to answer in a consistent way today. Fabio, you?
I think the question we should answer today is, should SIG cloud provider be the SIG that is hosting anything that has to do with cloud providers, where cloud providers word is used loosely, as in, you know, any vendor that has a cloud platform which Kubernetes runs on, which means covering CSI, CCM, and authentication plugins, whatever else.
Sorry, just to jump back in, I think Travis actually hit on something, which is that a cloud provider may be the developer of a CSI driver, but there may be either CSI drivers that are not vendor mapped one-to-one to a vendor. And that's where this organization gets inconsistent or asymmetric.
But here's the thing, the distinction is clear there, because if it's core CSI, then it lives under Kubernetes CSI and it's owned by SIG storage. If it's a core CSI component, even like the NFS CSI plugin that lives under Kubernetes CSI and it's owned by SIG storage. Anything that has to do with a provider-specific implementation of CSI that has no OWN currently, so there's no SIG owning it. So I'm wondering if SIG cloud providers should own that as well, and should own any other thing that may come up, you know, thing like ingress controllers for specific cloud providers.
Right, and that's oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think where it gets tricky is there are vendors developing CSI drivers that work on some, but not all cloud providers. And so a user would reasonably expect to find maybe one of these will work for you. And I'm just having a hard time on the spot understanding how we would categorize those.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're running out of time. I think we should move this to the mailing list. Or we can just like decide that at least for the first action item, we can move the CSI directory into an optional thing for now. And then we can fold kind of all the CSI drivers under either the SIG or another SIG. But like, I think SIG Cloud Provider would happily kind of sponsor that repository for the provider-specific CSI drivers, and then we can move to the mailing list for further discussion on this.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Good.
Cool. Travis, can you follow up and update this cap?
Yes, I will do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we're at time. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, gang.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, folks.
Everybody.